Hey everybody, this is Tony Gray from the Opinionated Security Podcast. Welcome to episode 6. Today's topic is going to be measuring cyber program success, and we're going to be focusing specifically on cyber threat intelligence. This is really the first in a series of videos in which I plan to demonstrate to senior cyber practitioners how to produce simple program narratives and metrics for various parts of infosec and cyber programs that honestly have been historically difficult to measure. I believe that leaders need to boldly reduce the amount of non-measurable activities in their programs to close to zero as possible. And unless those same leaders only want lukewarm or arbitrary executive support, they need to develop simple program narratives that executives can understand and internalize in order to win their strong support as they move forward and mature their programs. Now, this video assumes that you already have some level of basic knowledge about cyber threat intelligence and the cyber threat intelligence process. I'm not going to go through these things in detail because the point is to talk about new ways of defining and measuring success, not to really rehash the basics of cyber threat intelligence. This is definitely not cyber threat 101. If that's what you need, there's plenty of videos online that can give you a foundational overview of cyber threat intelligence. You should also be familiar with my broader thinking about non-measurable and programized activities. I'll put a link to a blog post that I wrote about a year ago in the comments below. If you haven't read that yet, you should probably read that to get some understanding as to how to think about measurable versus non-measurable activities. Then, as always, I am a CISO, but I'm probably not your CISO. So don't take anything that I talk about here as legal, regulatory, or any other type of advice. I'm just an opinionated guy on the internet that's giving you some things to think about that you may be able to use in your own program. Leverage your own CISO, legal team, whoever you need for advice within your own organization. Feel free to comment below as well in the comment section. If you agree or disagree with any of the points that I make, I like to engage in good discourse in the comments. And lastly, I'm not speaking on behalf of my current or any past employers, and any and all expressed opinions are strictly my own. This presentation's primarily an attempt to answer the question of how do you measure the success of a cyber threat intelligence program at the program level and also at the executive level. And I'll be providing an alternative cyber threat intelligence model to use that you can use to describe the program to executives. It's not replacing it's not intended to replace the cyber threat intelligence framework or process. It is intended to provide a framework for communicating about your cyber threat intelligence program to people that may not be threat intelligence experts. Now, it's important to watch all the way to the end because we'll talk about how to build various threat intelligence program level measures, and then also how to build executive level cyber threat intelligence measures. Please subscribe. Really, I need the subscribers. So, just like the phrase perception is reality is somewhat of a truism, if you can't articulate value for something that you're doing, there probably isn't much value. I like to use the phrase about turning traditional thinking and thought leadership on its head so that we can define, extract, and report true value around programs. And you can see on the slide that there's much of the activity-driven outcomes or around time spent rather than in actual outcomes, in measurable outcomes. As I continue to mature in my activity versus program-driven thinking, I'm beginning to believe that a key attribute of program-driven outcomes is that your narratives for programs can be turned into simple elevator pitches, even for the most complex program like cyber threat intelligence. And you should be able to articulate these in about 30 to 60 seconds or less. Work that's activity driven oftentimes requires a significant voiceover and explanation for an executive audience to understand and internalize. And this can be a blocker to having the level of executive support that you need. So I think senior security practitioners need to constantly be evaluating their narrative to be indicators of areas where they may be more activity driven than program driven. So anyone who's familiar with cyber threat intelligence is familiar with the cyber threat intel cycle. It's this one you see on your screen or some facsimile. There may be additional items in the circle, but it's more or less the same model. It's probably the most common conceptual representation of cyber threat intelligence that there is, and generations now of consultants and vendors that have worked pretty hard to add an increasing amount of overhead to it. One thing that you need to understand is, all models are wrong, some models are useful. This is a useful model for threat intelligence practitioners. It may or may not be the best model for executives or people that are outside of the threat intelligence community. As you work through helping execs to understand the process, again through that voiceover, you'll also have to work through what I call discipline-specific jargon. I mean, these are things like, attribution, reputation, threat actor reports, continuous improvement, feeds, indicators, and much more. And as important as this jargon might be to cyber threat intelligence practitioners, execs don't care as much about the process or the jargon. They just want to know, what is all of this leading to? Are we better or worse than we would be if we didn't have a cyber threat intelligence program? And when we think about this in the context of where does this lead to, as I talked about, all models are wrong, some models are useful. If you notice, this model, while fundamental to the work stream of the discipline of cyber threat intelligence, actually leads to itself, even in the model. So it's a constant circle, which I believe the model itself makes the measurement of success more difficult. As an example, as part of the research that I was doing for this video, I found a 64-page PDF about cyber threat intelligence. The better part of 63 pages are about the process, and there are exactly 7 lines, not pages, on how to measure success. 1 paragraph on how to measure success of the program in a 64-page PDF. And the irony here is, success is what the executives care about. The process is for us as engineers or cyber threat intelligence practitioners or cybersecurity practitioners that are consuming cyber threat intel. That's for us to understand. What execs care about is it successful? Is the investment that we're making in this program successful? And you can also tell from the model there's a lot of activity and ceremonies that define adherence to the model. There's a lot of admin overhead and the program narrative using this model needs non-trivial explanation. And to me, that's, it has all of the hallmarks of an activity and driven investment. So I've highlighted in this slide the majority of what I call seemingly sparse information on the internet about what cyber threat intelligence programs should measure. It's really kind of amazing how many questions are on the internet where people say, hey, how do I measure this program? And no one really has an answer. Most of the thought leadership in the area is driven by vendors, and of course, vendors will tell you to measure whatever it is that their application or service does best. So when I look at these that are on the slide, I have it kind of in a word cloud format. MTTR, or mean time to resolution, that's mildly interesting from an outcome perspective. But many of the others are tightly focused on adhering to the process and ceremonies of the threat intelligence cycle. There isn't really a single view on the slide that seems to conclusively answer the question of, while we're doing things that are necessary to stop bad things, are we spending time and resources in the right places to stop things that really need to be stopped? Now, you may be saying, like, wait, Tony, it says right there, incidents prevented. But when we think about a metric around incidents prevented, and I'm assuming that that's quantitative, that doesn't account for things like recurring incidents, or it also doesn't tell me if I'm doing air quotes here, the juice was worth the squeeze in terms of investment for the incidents that were prevented. Sure, you can anecdotally talk about a couple of specific incidents, but overall, are we giving the executives a sense that not only are we investing in a program and doing a lot of things, here's some tangible outcomes of the program that at least we can agree are representative of value to the organization. This is, again, what executives want to know. These are valid executive level questions. The other thing that's missing from these measures and metrics is the value that threat intelligence is adding collectively to other teams' processes and other programs and definitions. But we'll get more into that later. All right, so let me give a first shot at simplifying a narrative that executives might understand. I would start with the fact that there's a universe of cyber threats that are external to our organization. And of that universe, there's things that have recently changed. And among those things that have recently changed, there's some changes that actually could impact our organization. So when we think about a cyber threat intelligence program, perhaps we state it like this. There's a universe of cyber threats that have recently changed, and as changes that impact our organizations occur externally, there is a corresponding change that occurs internal to our organization to manage or remediate that particular new threat. There it is. A lot easier explaining than the threat intelligence cycle. It's something that executives can easily understand. It's not circular in nature. We have an outcome. So there is a threat that is pertinent to our organization, and there's some corresponding change that occurs within our own organization to combat, reduce, or detect that threat. So when I look at this in slightly more detail, we have the threat intelligence process that can either look at external threat reconnaissance information and proactively and determine if recent changes impact or don't impact our organization. And the other thing that I think that is novel about threat intelligence is there's probably a school of thought like that I hold, that the best threat intelligence is in our own systems to some degree, because these are things that have already attacked us in some ways. And so we can take that information reactively and begin to establish what needs to be remediated or managed and what changes need to occur within our organization. The measure of success isn't necessarily in our adherence to the threat intelligence cycle, which is something that we're going to use internally to the cyber threat intelligence team. But from an executive perspective, the indicator of success is what are the set of changes that occur inside our organization in response to changes that could changes in the threat landscape that could potentially impact our own organization. This could be lots of things. We could patch or upgrade, configuration changes, process changes, throw out a threat advisory to users. We can take down domains. There's a whole set of things. So how does this translate to metrics and measures? So now that we have an example set of internal changes that can occur as a result of external changes, we can put those along a x-axis. And to help us to group these, I've also grouped them by corrective controls, detective controls, preventative controls, external actions, and other internal actions. You might want to have, for instance, you might want to add OWASP top 10 items in here, or there may be other things that are important to your organization that would help you to understand and communicate the level of program success for your organization and your cyber threat intelligence program. And as we work through these, you can see that there's, especially on the internal actions, there's a risk register addition. So in my particular organization, if we have an addition to the risk register that is then not closed, it remains open either because a risk has been accepted or at the right level, or it is undergoing a risk treatment plan, then it's not considered completed. In some organizations, therefore, it may make sense to track the number of items that have been added to our risk register because they're undergoing risk treatment plans as a measure of the effectiveness of the cyber threat intelligence program. Along the y-axis, we've added criticality. Now, these would be according to the definitions that we have internally for how we determine criticality, critical, high, low, medium, or whatever your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever your organization uses. This is obviously just an example. It's not even representative of the organization that I work in today, but it's an example for the video. So this would be the first step in terms of getting a program level view of the changes that we've identified as being success criteria, which are in response to changes in the external threat landscape. But this still isn't complete. So when we look at risk criticality, we want those to be living. So we want those to be living definitions. And we can envision scenarios where perhaps changes in the threat landscape aren't reflected in the way that we calculate criticality. And so we may have situations where a change in the threat landscape actually requires us to make changes to the taxonomy around our levels of criticality. And that is a value add in terms of what threat intelligence might be doing for us overall. And then lastly, we'll have items that are, I use the term in progress. It could be under analysis, whatever it is. We have items that have not gone through the threat intelligence cycle yet, haven't been analyzed, but we know from, a rapid risk assessment that the items are critical, high, medium, or low. And then we also can recognize that there may be items that, yeah, this is impactful to us, but we already have the controls in place or the configurations that we need, and no additional action is required. So this brings us to a more complete view of the outcomes of our threat intelligence program. Here is a full example or starting point for you to think about at the program level. We can then take this information and actually begin thinking about some of the possibilities for executive level presentations. So if we were we can summarize this information. I like to have a single view for a program, even very complex programs. I have a single view metric, for instance, for our security program in general, our infosec program, that tells us how we're doing. A lot of white space in there, but at the end of the day, it tells us how we're doing. So here's examples of two ways that you may give a single view to executives of the state of your cyber threat intelligence program. The first is to just summarize your risk level of detections versus remediations and work that's in progress. Now, that all models are wrong, some models are useful. That may be useful in your organization. But what also may be useful is the second example. For instance, if you have issues where you have high-level risks that are being accepted that shouldn't be accepted in your view, then you may want a metric that opens the possibility for discussion around those items. So I've shown a different example of the x-axis columns being what detections were treated, what detections were accepted, meaning the risk has not been treated and it's an open risk, purposefully, intentionally, and then which ones are under analysis or in process. And then we can also add, as I mentioned, MTTR, which is mean time to resolution, can be interesting, and you might want to think about perhaps another column around mean time to resolution by criticality, so that you can take a look and know that we are investing resources to respond to items that have more criticality faster than we are at the lower criticality items. Additionally, you may think about having a single view of your program in the main body of your slides, and then maybe a program view with more detail in the appendix of the slide, particularly if you're talking to a board or giving a C-level presentation. That'd probably give a really good view for the people that care to dig a little bit deeper than just this view that you see here. Well, hopefully this presentation gives you some ways to think about your program narrative for your cyber threat intelligence program that are different from the norm and some of the existing and vendor thought leadership driven models that are out on the internet, and also helps you to derive program level metrics that actually are useful and give a single view of your program, both at the program level and at the executive level. As always, I appreciate you taking the time to spend with me, and subscribe. Thank you very much.